Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the RF1 build series. In today's episode we're going to be rebuilding a transmission. This transmission is a T56 that I picked up on Facebook Marketplace for about 800 bucks. I was told it had a bad third gear. I've never actually rebuilt a transmission before, so I figured this actually be a good one to try and figure out and see how hard it'd be. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? First things first, whenever you're rebuilding a transmission, you want to go ahead and drain the fluid. So I went ahead and popped out the drain plug, and to my surprise I found out that it was empty. This isn't too big of a deal. Chances are the previous owner drained the fluid and saw all the metal chunks and everything in it before deciding to sell it to me, confirming that something was definitely broken inside. After that, I pulled off the throwout bearing, and then pulled off the bell housing. Next, we're going to go ahead and break loose the front transmission plate bolts. These bolts hold on the front plate of the transmission, and we need to go ahead and break these loose because we're going to turn the transmission up onto its nose, and we're going to work on it from the very top down. And so we want to go ahead and get these bolts taken out now, because whenever we stand it up on the table, we're not obviously going to be able to access them. Here I'm testing to make sure that I was able to break loose, and I'm glad I did, because I found that there was a bolt that was completely just covered in grease, and had I used the sponsor of today's video, I would have been able to find that bolt a lot easier. Speaking of, what is today's sponsor?
Oh, hi there! Didn't see you guys there. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm getting ready to clean this engine block, and as you can see, there's a lot of grime and grease kind of built up on there. Now, if any of you have wrenched on cars and stuff before, and have tried to clean up stuff that has a lot of grease built up on it, you can know how much of a challenge that might be. Well, good thing is today we've partnered with Super Clean to help you guys see how well Super Clean actually cleans up this kind of grime and grease on engines, on any kind of automotive project you might be working on. And I highly recommend them. Last year they sent me a box to try out a couple of their products, and ever since then I've actually been buying them because I really do enjoy using them, and I highly recommend using this over brake cleaner if that's what you guys are currently using today. And if you are and you're interested in giving this a try, well, good thing is we partnered with Super Clean, and we're going to send a box of the Super Clean original spray bottle as well as one of their aerosol cans to one of you lucky winners. All you got to do to enter is be subscribed to my YouTube channel and then comment down below on this video. Let me know what you think you might be using the Super Clean products to actually clean on your project. We'll be choosing one of you with a randomizer, and we'll make sure to announce the winner on our Facebook page. So make sure you're also following our Facebook page. I'll have a link to that down in the description as well. We will be doing a live stream showing the winner of the box. So again, thank you Super Clean for partnering with us today. Let's get back to that show.
Continuing on, we're going to go ahead and pull off the front plate of the transmission. You don't necessarily need to do this. I only did this because I wanted to double check the bearing race. I wasn't sure if I was going to actually tear the transmission all the way down to this point, but I did ultimately end up doing so, and if you're going to be doing a full rebuild, you're probably going to be tearing it down to that point anyways. So instead of building a proper stand for this transmission, I ended up actually drilling a hole into the countertop of my desk that I have out in my garage. I only did this because I plan on redoing my countertops later on, and so I had no issue going ahead and doing that for this project. Next, I went ahead and pulled off the shifter. As you can see here, this is the little shifter assembly that your shifter goes into, and then I pulled off the tail housing itself after removing the bolts. This is when I found my first problem. As you can see, there's tons of metal pieces stuck to the magnets there, and then that down there is a broken shifter linkage for, I believe, the 5th and 6th gear, if I remember correctly. I went ahead and ordered another one of those shifter linkages, and then I went ahead and started putting down paper towels, because next we're going to start tearing into this thing. There's ultimately 2 lock ring pliers that you're going to need to tear down the entire transmission, and I'll throw those in the description below, along with the tutorial videos that I watched to rebuild this thing. I'm not going to make this video itself a full tutorial video because there's actually some guys that put a lot of time into putting a lot of detail in their videos about how to rebuild this transmission, and those guys deserve the credit for building those videos and putting the effort they did into those. So I'm going to go ahead and link those down in the description below. If that's what you're looking for, make sure to go watch those. I just wanted to bring you guys along for the journey of how I rebuilt mine. So as you saw just before this, I laid down those paper towels, and the reason for that is because I'm trying to lay everything down in chronological order as we work down the spine of the transmission. And so everything that was at the very top will be all the way to the left, and everything that'll be at the bottom of this shaft will be all the way to the right. And I would highly recommend trying to do this, or at least being organized in some way similar to this, so that way when you go to put everything back together, it's all in a very specific order, and you kind of just stack it all back on top of each other. Hey guys, here is where we're currently at with the transmission rebuild. As you can see, we got quite a bit of it already taken apart and put on the bench here. And kind of what I've done is I've taken each piece one by one, and I've laid it in an orientation so that way when I put it back together, it'll all kind of stack back on top of each other in the exact order and orientation that it was in whenever I pulled it from the transmission. Right now, we're actually getting to the point where we're pretty much ready to pull the main housing off and separate it from the front case here at the very bottom. And honestly, I'm pretty impressed with what I see so far. I haven't found a lot of damage other than this one shift fork. Obviously, the shift fork is broken and completely just snapped right there. And there's a little bit of pieces and some debris here. And I've even found a little bit of debris that was like inside of the synchronizer. But I feel if I clean it out and kind of reassemble this transmission, it might actually be okay. My plan is I'm going to go ahead and continue stripping it all the way down. I'm going to pull this housing off, and I'm going to inspect the rest of the gears and everything. When I bought this transmission, the guy originally told me he thought third gear was the one that had failed. And whenever I pulled the front cover off and inspected the third and fourth gears, they looked completely fine. And I really think what it is that shift fork failed and just caused the shifting mechanism to be able to go into third to not properly work. And so it just never actually went into gear. I think it was really just that shift fork issue. I already have another shift fork, so I'm going to replace that with a brand new one. That's pretty obvious. But I think what I'm going to continue to do is I'm just going to clean up the rest of this housing while I have it here right now. I do still need to finish disassembling the rest of the shifter housing and assembly. And then once I have that off, I can actually take this main casing off. And then from there, we'll just see how the rest of the transmission looks. Let's get back to work. There's a good parts diagram that is an exploded view of how this transmission is put together. It's very complicated very quickly though, and I found that having everything lined up in a specific way really helped me when I was rebuilding everything. So we're going to continue pulling off all of these gears. The first gears that we pulled off was actually the reversed 6th and 5th gear, because those are above this next main housing that we're going to be trying to pull off to get to the rest of the gears that we need to rebuild. So we're going to continue disassembling this next section, and there's a couple external sensors that I went ahead and pulled off. And then we're going to get to this actual shifter linkage area down here. And this is what your shifter rod is connected to, and this is where the H pattern of the shifter is actually formed. There's a little ball, and it goes to a plate, and you'll see that plate actually has that H pattern on there. And the ball kind of follows that pattern as you move and twist that rod to put the transmission into specific gears. The big thing that you need to try to take note of is when you're pulling this plate and rod and everything off, and whenever you're trying to lift the center housing up, there is a ball that is under spring tension that's on that plate. And that ball will easily kind of shoot out and get lost, and as you'll see here in a moment, I'll actually do that. So I just want you guys to be aware, so that way you know that you don't want to lose this ball, because you do ultimately need it to rebuild your shifter assembly. Here I'm just making sure that the shifter plate itself is actually ready to come out, and that the assembly is kind of loose and ready to follow the housing as we lift it up. Next, I'm going to go ahead and break loose the bolts holding the whole shifter rail assembly together. These bolts, you got to be very careful. As you can see here, they are Torx bolts, and you don't want to round those things out, because we know how those things are when you round them out. So be very careful. They are under quite a bit of torque, so try your best to get the fitting on there as straight as possible. Don't round those things out.
It's catching down there, yeah.
What's this? Shifter linkage. Oh. Just watch where that ball goes for me, please.
I think it went up against the fan.
Okay. I guess.
Either the fan or the heater.
Move that, yeah, and that for me, please. Thank you. Sweet.
Yeah, because it went in that far corner.
And then it fell.
Yeah, bounced, and it sounded like it hit something over.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Here's where we're currently at with the transmission. As you can see, we have the middle case actually completely taken all the way off. And overall, what I'm noticing is everything's looking like it's in good condition. There have been, you know, some more metal pieces I found within the transmission case. There's quite a bit of debris and stuff built in here where the whole like shifter mechanism and everything was. So right now I have all that taken apart. I made sure to keep track of where my ball went. You want to make sure not to lose this. And then this spring as well. This spring is where that ball stays perched, and then it goes inside of this whole assembly, and that's actually what does your whole H pattern and everything. So you want to make sure not to lose any of that. So I kind of kept all that together. I'm going to start cleaning this and just get this nice and pretty for the most part, clean most of the debris and everything out of it. But so far, from what I'm seeing, I mean, everything else looks to be like it's in great condition. I'm not really noticing any kind of wear and tear on any of the gears. I'm not really finding too many parts down here on this side of the transmission. So I'm kind of going through and checking to see how bad it is. But we might be able to slap this thing together with the new shifter fork in, and we might be good to go. And as you can see here, here's that new shifter fork. I've already got that, like I said, in. It's also got the little bushings that go on the end there and everything. I did notice, you know, I have this clamp here that I think fell out of this synchronizer, so I got to figure out where that stuff goes during reassembly. But we might actually be okay to go with this thing. So I'm going to continue working. I'm going to, like I said, finish cleaning this, get this looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and move it out of the way just to get it out of the way for now. And then I'm going to continue inspecting, and I might tear it down a little bit more to see if it's even needed. But I might kind of leave this as is and then rebuild what I've already found that's broken, and we might just send it, boys, and see how we do. Let's get to it. Alrighty, guys, so one more quick update that I found. Earlier I had mentioned finding this like snap ring, wasn't exactly sure where it went. So after a little bit of research, I found out that it kind of holds in these keys that are right here. So I need to actually order at least one of these brand new anyways, because as you can see here, we have a little piece that's broken, and I'm missing it right there on that one specifically. So no matter what, I actually have to order one to get that fixed. So I think for the rest of the night, I'm going to finish cleaning this, get this looking as fresh as possible. Try and just inspect it a little bit more, see if I find anything else. I have put it in both third and fourth gear multiple times. I've held tension on this shaft while spinning it, and I'm not feeling anything binding up or not wanting to spin properly. I'm not seeing any damage or anything anywhere. The reason I'm thinking I'm not going to actually disassemble this section of the transmission is simply because of the fact I'll need to actually put this on a full-size press, which at the moment I do not have in order to press some of the gear assemblies off of the shaft.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
I'm going to replace just what I found broken, which is basically just that, you know, this whole synchronizer assembly, that shift fork. Replace it with that brand new one, and I think we're gonna call it a day. So I did actually find one more thing wrong with the transmission, and this one unfortunately is a little bit more catastrophic. If you look right here, we got some synchronizer teeth on this gear that are completely just sheared off. That is definitely why this probably wasn't going into third gear. I'm gonna double check the diagrams. I'm probably wrong. This may or may not have been third gear. I was thinking this was third gear and that was fourth gear. So I'm going to double check the diagram, see which gear this is, but essentially we just have to get that gear replaced. Luckily, it looks like this gear over here, the counter gear, isn't actually damaged in any way whatsoever, so I think we're good there. But yeah, unfortunately, we are going to have to get that replaced. It definitely is not going to shift into gear like that. So I think at this point, I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. We're going to start ordering parts. I'm going to get this gear ordered, as well as the other little pin things we need for the synchronizer to get that fixed. And at that point, we should be able to get this put back together. I guess I'm going to have to figure out where I'm going to be able to get a press, so that way I can actually go ahead and get this gear replaced, because I think I'm going to actually have to press this gear out. So I'm going to look into that, see what all I need to do, and we'll get back to it.
Lucky for me, this is YouTube, and all I have to do is clap my hands and I have a press in my garage. First things first, let's go ahead and let's take off that broken third gear that we found, and this is really the main reason we bought the press. In order to get the whole main shaft fully disassembled, you really do need a press for this. If you don't have one, definitely take this to a transmission shop if you're not comfortable working with one. Here you can see where the synchronizer like nubs are kind of completely just shaven off of this gear, and when I show you the new one here, you can see that the actual teeth for the synchronizer are much more apparent. Those things were completely just sheared off flat. So that's definitely going to fix the bulk of the issues that the transmission was having. That broken shifter linkage that I found previously, I think was in conjunction with this. I'm sure all of that kind of happened at the exact same time. Somebody maybe made a money shift or something, not going to say anything, but at least the previous owner that sold me this transmission was truthful in saying that something was wrong with third gear, and obviously something was. I'm okay with what I bought because I knew ahead of time what I was getting into, and honestly it was fun kind of rebuilding a transmission for my first time. Now that I've gone through and done this, I'm not afraid to do it again if I need to. It's genuinely not too terribly hard once you're willing to kind of get over the overwhelming fact that a transmission just has a lot of gears in it, and as long as you get them in the right place, it's nothing too crazy. One thing I wanted to point out here, as you can see, I'm actually using Super Clean to clean up a lot of the gears and synchronizer assemblies in each individual little component before I reassemble the transmission. The biggest reason for this is because there were still little pieces of metal and grime and grease kind of built up in all the little nooks and crannies that they could possibly go. So I made sure to clean up everything as much as possible. The funny part is, I actually wasn't partnered with Super Clean for this video yet during that period of time. I'm being completely honest when I say that I use Super Clean in my personal time without them having to sponsor me, because I genuinely do like their product. So that's kind of why I was showcasing it there. I noticed that while I was editing, and I just thought that was kind of funny. Here, I just wanted to show you guys what the rest of the synchronizer assembly kind of looked like. Once you get the 3 gears lined up in the slots they're supposed to go into, you have that spring. You kind of just need to use your hands to guide and press into place. And my biggest advice that I can give whenever you're doing this is make sure to cover the spring with your hand. So if anything happens to shoot up, your hand kind of immediately stops anything from just shooting out and, you know, not hitting you in the eye. It's the most dangerous part. So here I'm going to continue doing my cleanup process. Like I said, I'm going through every last little piece, every washer, everything. Biggest reason for this too is because a lot of these parts have been sitting on my desk for months now, because just over time I didn't get this project completed as fast as I was hoping, and so things just sat for a little bit. They got dusty, they got dirty. I worked on other projects in the garage, so who knows what all got all over these gears and everything. So whenever you're working on this kind of stuff, just make sure it's as clean as freaking possible. That's what I try to do here. Next, we're going to go ahead and reassemble the remaining part of the transmission, and I do greatly apologize. I guess I failed at filming putting in the main shaft into the center case, and then also putting in the counter shaft and everything too. I do greatly apologize. I don't know what happened, but I completely failed at recording any of that. Basically, it's just the reverse of obviously what we did, and like I said, the other tutorial videos that I'm linking in the description, those will go into much more detail about that stuff if that's what you're looking for. But here I'm going to go ahead and continue doing the assembly of the tail shaft section, and this is pretty much just the 5th, 6th, and reverse gear. And here I'm just making sure everything is obviously spinning nicely. You don't want anything to be binding up whenever you're kind of assembling all this. And my biggest advice that I can give you guys too whenever you're assembling this main shaft is make sure that everything is kind of lining up properly. As you're putting in your snap rings and your lock rings, you'll notice that if you have something off or you're missing a washer or something like that, the snap ring and the lock ring isn't going to be lined up with like the gear that it's supposed to be lined up with. And so if you're seeing that things aren't lining up, then you're obviously missing something, and you want to go back and double check that. And part of the reason I'm saying that is because here in just a moment we'll actually see me go back and do exactly that. While I was doing this, I was noticing that I had one piece just sitting on the desk that wasn't getting used, and the farther and farther I got to completing the tail shaft section, I realized this piece wasn't going to be used. So I went back, disassembled everything, and found where this one metal washer was supposed to go. And it actually went all the way under everything I had just done. And unfortunately, this stuff does happen, but when it does, just try to remember it's part of the process. At least you caught it. You caught it now before it was in the car. Whoops. Continuing on, we're going to go ahead and redo that whole tail shaft section. I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing all over again, though. I'm just going to go ahead, get the counter shaft put into place. There was just one piece that I had missed right at the bottom of that counter shaft section, and without that, obviously, I was going to have some major issues, so I'm glad I caught that. Next, I'm going to go ahead and put some gear oil into the transmission, and I'm doing this for 2 reasons. One, to start going ahead and kind of pre-lubing all of the gears. I'm going to spin the shafts and allow all of the oil to get in between the teeth and everything. And then for the second reason, I want to double check and make sure that my sealing surfaces and everything have fully sealed the way they're supposed to. This was done at least 24 hours after I had sealed the bottom section of the transmission case, and then I'm going to let it sit overnight before I actually pick it up and try to put it under the car after sealing this tail shaft section. Now, I did actually have an issue with this tail shaft section. When it sat underneath the car and it was sitting horizontally, it started to leak out of the tail shaft section that you're seeing me seal up right now. So obviously I did something wrong. I'm assuming that maybe when I was putting the tail shaft on, like you see here, that maybe I like smeared the surfaces too much, and it didn't cause the bond to properly adhere like it was supposed to. So wasn't too big of a deal. I just had to ultimately pull the transmission out back from under the car, and then take off the tail shaft section and just reseal it. Took me about an hour and a half. It wasn't anything too crazy. I'm glad I at least got that done and got that fixed. Next, we're going to go ahead and try and get everything lined up. The biggest thing is you just want to make sure that your counter shaft and your shifter linkage assembly all line up into the holes that they're supposed to at the back section of the tail shaft. And at that point, we're pretty much done. You slap your shifter on, you get everything put together, and you make sure that it's working. It's also a good idea to go ahead and spin the shaft, make sure you're not feeling any resistance along whenever you're going through any of the gears and spinning the main shaft at the same time. Here's also a good demonstration of what the shifter assembly and everything looks like whenever it's going through and kind of moving the ball on that H plate. If you all remember the transmission mount from a few episodes back, well, here it is again. I 3D printed these dimple die presses that we're going to try to add a little bit of strength to this transmission mount. Originally, it was going to be a temporary kind of mount, and it still is. I was thinking maybe if I added this dimple die to it, it added just enough strength that I could actually use it. Unfortunately, it actually bent it a little bit, and it's not really as strong as I need it to be. And it's also just not going to work as well with the actual rubberized mount that I bought for the transmission. So we'll go back and revisit that and redo the whole thing. Next, we're going to move to the flywheel, clutch, and pressure plate. We're going to go ahead and get that thrown on, so that way we can get the bell housing and transmission put into place as well. Once I got the bolts snugged up against the flywheel, I went ahead and backed one of them out at a time and then put the Loctite that was needed in order to actually torque them all the way down. And then I torqued them down, and then I did the same thing basically with the pressure plate. I lined it up, put the bolts on, and then I took them out one at a time, put the Loctite on them, and then torqued them down. Now it's time to go ahead and get the bell housing itself on. This isn't too big of a deal, but one thing I did have to do and be mindful of is I actually have spacers on this bell housing in between the bell housing and the back of the engine. That is because with the transmission that I am running, I am required to run this spacer in order for the input shaft not to go too deep into the crankshaft itself of the engine. This is an issue with Gen 5 engines, so if anybody's doing like a newer Gen 5 V8 swap, you're going to run into the same thing, and you're going to need these same spacers if you're running like a F-body T56. It was at this point in time I started to be attacked by a vicious monster. It tried to take out my hand, but I was able to actually fight it off, and it ran off when I tried to actually befriend it and get it to work with me. Amazing how that happens.
What does my hand? Hey, can you help me put this in? Can you help me put this in? Do you think you can put this in for me? Yeah, this. No, over here. Okay, bye, Susie.
Alrighty guys, so don't mind the little bit of stuff that we will be showing you in the next episode. Here's just a sneak preview of a few things. But as you can see, I do have a ratchet strap right here, and I actually was able to get this transmission in by myself with ratchet straps, and then eventually I used a transmission jack to help kind of hoist it up and get it into position. But the shifter is technically in place. You can see it's actually really close to where we want it. The shifter itself should pretty much come right out of the hole. I might have to trim the north part of that hole just a little bit just to make enough room for the full functionality of the shifter to go into all the gears, and then I might have to actually trim this section right here a little bit. That's fine. Later on we'll talk about this whole thing right here. I know it looks kind of crazy right now, but yeah, we might have to trim that and get that all figured out. The other big issue that unfortunately we're having right now is down here. So here is the transmission itself. As you can see, she is in place, bolted to the engine. And I'm using that transmission mount that you saw us finish off just to hold it in place right now. I do actually have a rubber bushing that I'm going to actually be putting in place to support the weight of the transmission properly. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to redo this entire mount. I'm probably going to use some kind of square tubing to make something a lot stronger than this plate that I put here. This was initially just meant to be temporary. I kind of put the dimple in there to see if I could maybe make it strong enough to actually use for full-time use, but it's not going to be. It's too weak. We're going to just replace it with the proper transmission mount, so we'll go back to that in a future episode, get that fixed. But while I was getting the transmission installed, unfortunately, as I was tightening everything up, if you look right there, that is a crack in the bell housing, and that is not what you want.
While I was driving in, that bolt that's right behind the red nipple, you can kind of barely see the head right there. I was tightening it up a little bit, trying to get it flushed up and completely mated to the bell housing itself. And as it was drawing it in, the bell housing cracked right where you can see that crack just above the red nipple. And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to pull everything back out to replace the bell housing now. I'm assuming what happened was there was a dowel pin that is right about right here. Oh geez, if I can get my finger up there, it's right about right here. And I think there was just a little bit too much dirt, and I'm sorry, I think the dowel pin's actually down here. But I think there's too much dirt or something built up around the dowel pin area. And I think maybe it just put too much pressure on that bolt spot where I was trying to draw it in. And it just didn't actually get flush due to having dirt and grime and grease and stuff in there. So I'm gonna pull it back out, try to clean it up. I'm really hoping that's what it is. I mean, honestly, everything else went pretty smooth. I had most of the bolts, you know, flush all the way up against the bell housing and transmission mating surfaces. And it seemed like it was going well, and that was actually the last bolt I was working on, and then that happened. So, all right, guys, I think I'm going to go ahead and call it quits here. Unfortunately, with the bell housing breaking where it did, that's a pretty big stopping point. I got to wait for the next one to come in. This video is already turning out to be a pretty long one, so I think this is going to be a good way to wrap it up. Thank you again for Super Clean for partnering with us today to give one of you guys some of their products. Like I said, make sure to comment down below. Tell me what you think you might be using the Super Clean products to actually clean on your project. And we'll be picking one lucky winner on our Facebook page, so make sure you're following our Facebook page as well. I'll also probably announce the winners through a short or something like that on YouTube, so that way we don't miss anybody if you're not following it for whatever reason. Gonna try to be as fair as possible. But go ahead, comment down below, enter the giveaway, and until next time, we'll see you in the next episode. Peace! And make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I promise you're not gonna want to miss the next episode.
Who's that broken?